Today, my esteemed guest is Dr. Mia Settles-Tidwell on Pamela Price Unfiltered. Dr. Mia Settles-Tidwell is the founder and president and CEO of Set Up for Success, a leading executive consulting and organizational health agency. She is an alumnus of both UC Berkeley and Cal State University East Bay. With over 30 years of educational experience, she served in multiple executive roles as a vice president, university diversity officer, assistant vice chancellor, and chief of staff and chief operating officer in both the UC and the Cal State University higher education systems. Dr. Settles-Tidwell is a writer for justice and the author of Unscathed, a harm reduction strategy for women of color in the workplace. She is an accomplished and nationally sought after executive coach, thought leader, adjunct professor, speaker, and organizational health consultant. I had the good fortune to meet Dr. Settles-Tidwell while serving as the first Black female district attorney and the first non-appointed elected district attorney ever in Alameda County. She blessed me with her book, and I confessed I was not able to fully digest it until after I left the toxic environment I was navigating as the district attorney. However, once I sat down to read Unscathed, I could not put it down. It was part of my healing, and it's been my honor and delight to share the book with as many women as I know who really need it, and to host a book reading and conversation on Sunday, March 30th at Marcus Bookstore in Oakland. So let's talk about it. Dr. Settles-Tidwell, welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered.
Wow. Thank you, Honorable Pamela Price, for having me. It is such a delight to be with you this evening.
So let's talk about your background and how you came to write this amazing little book.
Oh, my goodness, my background. Well, I'm Bay Area born and raised, but I have Southern parents. My father was from Arkansas, and my mother was from Mississippi, and they actually met at the Oakland Army base, and that's where the love connection happened. And if anybody know about the old Oakland Army base, that
Yes.
was a center point to Oakland in the Bay Area. And so was raised in Richmond, went to all of the schools, and have always had social justice at the core of who I am. Some of my uncles and family members had been a part of the Black Panthers, so activism has been just a natural part of who I am. And then coming up, I've always wanted to serve my community, very similar to you, right? You take these roles in service of community.
Right.
And so after going through and earning all of my degrees and doing the work, doing what is said and necessary to be in position to make decisions on behalf of our community and others. I was faced after 32 years in the system of recognizing a pattern. And I must say, when I saw you on the news during that time, because it was actually all during the same window of time, that I started to say, wow, there is an institutional violence happening against African American women in particular, and then women of color in general, that I must speak about. And so in the same moment, it was happening to me, and I recognized it, but I recognized it through seeing the picture of this beautiful woman, Bonnie Candia Bailey, out of Lincoln University. She was a vice president, African American woman, beautiful smile. And on January 8th of 2024, she committed suicide based on the workplace bullying that was happening to her. But I also saw myself in her, and I said, I do not want to go down that pathway of feeling like I need to take my life, and I'm not going to allow someone to take my professional, stellar 32-year career. But what I am going to do is I'm going to talk about people being unharmed, and speak life into women, to let them know that someone is justifying and verifying what they are experiencing. And so I wrote the book Unscathed in 4 weeks, and it got on the shelf, and here we are.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what is the book about? Tell my audience.
Wow, the book. Well, first of all, the book is truly a, a guide. It's a strategy for how to recognize who you are, first and foremost, and to know that you're not the problem, that there's an institutional sanctioned violence designed against African American women and women of color in the workplace that is intentional to kind of get rid of us, to harm us. And I want you to be able to navigate those spaces without being harmed and to see and know how to address them before they address you.
Wow.
And so that's the impetus for the book. It's to be also there for validation, to validate that you are not the problem. It's also there to help you have an exit plan, both a self-preservation strategy, because sometimes you have to stay within the system while you're trying to get out of the system.
Right.
But while you're there, how to preserve, and then also how to exit with grace and on your own terms.
Wow. That's amazing and so well needed. As someone who had to exit, I did feel like I exited with grace and certainly with a lot of love from our community, notwithstanding the circumstances. So, but one of the things that you talk about in the book is being an activist at the table. And I was accused of being an activist DA. Can you talk about what does it mean to be, what is that term? Because you coined that term, activist at the table. And tell the audience, what does it mean to be an activist at the table?
And thank you for that question. So my dissertation was about at the table activism because I've never seen myself as an administrator, although 20 plus years of my 32 years in education was spent being a quote administrator. But to me, that means that you only represent the interests of the institution. Well, I've always felt as a person of color that my real role was to represent the interests of the people who I was a public servant for, and that it was not going to be in opposition to an institution, but it was going to assess the risk of the person and the institution so that everyone can come out unscathed, unharmed. It was also to really use your position of power and influence to create opportunities and conditions that were improved for the greater good. And so that's what an at the table activist is. They use their position of power to open doors, to make room, and to improve systems so that we won't perpetuate oppression and discrimination and prejudice, all the things that we see unfortunately happening today.
Right. That's pretty amazing. I can share with you, as you know, I went into the DA's office with 32 years of being an activist lawyer and someone that represented the interests of the community and certainly felt like that was important. And that's how I was elected, in fact, to do that, to bring the community into the criminal justice system. And yet there were folks that ultimately decided that that was too much. And so when you talk about institutional violence, can you talk a little bit about how that impacts those of us who actually are representing the interests of the community in these institutions?
Sure. It's interesting when you first, of course, I have a chapter called the chapter 5, HR is your employer's best friend, not yours. But when you first get to a job, they roll out the red carpet. They make you feel like, okay, we're here for you. And you can basically tell us anything. We want you to stay. And they tell you all the great things and the employee resource groups and all the wonderful ways that they're going to help you. But as soon as you have a problem, as soon as you start to kind of share how you want to push back on the status quo of the system that you're in, especially at the highest levels, the institution starts to create documentation about you. You become the problem. And so therefore they start to needle you. They do things that I also term needling because it's a slow churn and a slow scorching of your portfolio, whether that's exclusion from meetings or discrediting you in writing or in public, but subtly, removing you from having access to certain things, removing parts of your portfolio, diminishing your accomplishments. You start to notice that, and the institutions stand together, and folks who had been singing your praises start to get very quiet and almost like not with the institution, like that they agree with the violence ward against you. And so that's what it really is when the system turns on you, the system that you have been serving, the people that you have been serving, where they silence themselves when you speak truth to power or you name an incident of discrimination or unethical behavior. They don't want to assess the risk to themselves in terms of examining themselves. They want to then turn it on you and make you the problem. And so that's really what institutional sanctioned violence is. It is violent, it's purposeful, it's to harm you. And when I thought about Bonnie Kendia Bailey, it harmed her so much where she felt she had no other choice but to take her life. And my goal is for us not to have that be the story of women of color and Black women in particular in the workplace.
There's so many powerful moments in your book, probably because the topic and your ability to create the text is so powerful. But one of the many powerful moments that literally took my breath away was your description of how you met and engaged Leah Song Richardson. Can you share that with us?
Yes, that was very interesting. So I was a speaker, and I love the UC system. I want to just give a shout out to the UC system, not only the system that helped to curate, my intellectual prowess, but a system that has embraced me. So shout out to the UC system.
Yes, go Bears.
Yes, go Bears. So we were at a UC LA conference actually, and I was in the midst of writing the book. I had all chapters kind of outlined. And then all of a sudden, I'm walking to the table and I see Leah. And Leah had just put out her resignation letter to her campus. And it was so well written, but it had so many nuances, and you could read between the lines as to what she was saying. And it was such a powerful witness to me that I too could resign. I had already figured out that I was too deep for shallow water.
Hey,
and
come on now.
Okay, and the spirit had spoke to me and said, it's time for you to go. But I was pushed out, even though I knew it was time for me to go, but it was such a disrespectful way. But when I met Leah, I came up to her and just told her that her letter was just transformative to me. And she looked at me and just gave me the most nurturing hug and sisterly confidence. And we didn't really have to say much to understand what we both had went through. And so she was a big, big part of my transition to healing.
That's wonderful. Yes. What you say? Too shallow for deep water? Too deep for shallow water. Oh, I gotta get that right. Too deep for shallow water. Okay.
And so are you. So are you. You were clear. I would watch you on the screen and see how dignified you were through all of that. But I knew you carried a heavy weight. I knew that was not easy, and I'm not sure if you've gotten a chance to, tell your story the way I've gotten a chance to tell my story through my book, but I understood that a lot of what I saw as that standing in the presence, being strong behind the scenes, there was much more going on that caused me to definitely pray for you and just know exactly what it was. Again, that you were not the problem, that it was a system coming against you.
Oh, thank you for that. So many times people would say, I'm praying for you, sister. I see you. And I knew, there was so much going on and I needed those prayers, every one of them. I walked into a church one Saturday morning, one of the local churches, and I said, I just need to talk to the pastor. and they called him out, and I said, Pastor, I just need you to pray for me. I can't tell you what's going on. I can't talk about what I see. There's so much injustice in this system, but I need you to pray for me. And to his credit, he literally walked me to the front of the church, stopped the service, and had everybody start praying for me. And I'm so grateful for that, because that's the only way I made it through. There was so much violence, institutional violence, and undermining, attacks, all of that was happening as we were trying to be transformative and really repair a system that was in deep, deep trouble when I got there. So, yeah, I get to write that book. I will
Can't
get
wait
to write
read
that
it
book.
and give it to my 10 plus friends.
I know, right? So, talk about assessing the risk, because that's one of the things that you mentioned here, but it's also an important part of the book.
100%. Well, I think it's super important to know that everyone cannot do like I did. I was able to exit, one, because I have a wonderful husband supporting me, who, when I came home and said, babe, this place is trying to assault me and I cannot take it. He said he would work more jobs, and he said, just come home, baby. So you can't have everyone in that situation, take the leap that I took. And so I wanted to speak to women who were caught in the situation where they may be the only breadwinner of their home. They may be carrying the benefits. They may be the one who's caring for an elderly parent. So they need that position and job. So therefore, they have to assess whether or not they could leave or whether they need to stay and kind of navigate it in a certain way so that they can get to their next. But immediate leaving could not, and should not be everyone's first choice. That you have to assess your particular situation. The book is not really prescriptive, but it's a guidebook for you to consider some things and to think about some things, because I do not want folks to make hasty moves based on my situation, but create a situation where they again come out unscathed.
One of the things I was also very impressed by was you talked about the well-laid traps. Can you tell my audience about those?
Woo, yes, that one. So I'm not sure if you remember, but the president of Harvard University, Claudine Gay, was what I would call on trial rather than the hearing about how she handled the anti-Semitic acts on the Harvard campus. Now, at that same time, I was again in the same position at my former institution, and I was there writing about the same things and trying to address the same things. There was no blueprint for us to how to respond to October 7th. So we were all trying to gather the best way to handle everything that was going on with that. But when I watched her trial, I noticed that they were setting her up to just continuously fail in this interrogation of who she was. And when she finally decided to resign, because they went after her for plagiarism and they made it about so many other things other than the fact that this was a highly credentialed woman who made it to the top because of her integrity, and that she's taken on so many things well, that this should not have been the one thing that made her fall from grace. But she described it as a well-laid trap. And it made me think of the difference between a trap and a landmine. So in the book, chapter 3, I described for the audience the difference between a trap and a landmine. And then traps, of course, are things that you actually see coming. Landmine are things that you do not see. And so I try to, in the book, uncover some of those landmines so that you're more aware of when you are nearing one.
Excellent. Excellent. And you do so very well. Any closing thoughts for my audience, and particularly for women who hopefully will come and join us on March the 30th at Marcus Books. I'm sure it will be an amazing event, and I know that you will truly inspire and refresh those who are present. But any closing thoughts for my audience?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I just really want us, especially during these tumultuous times, to, one, hold on to our spirituality, kind of like what you said. We're going to need prayer, but we're also going to need to have a strategy. And I created these things. I'm not sure if you can see it, called the Black Strategy Card. And on one side is, our lifelong member, but the other side talks about the different strategies that we need to consider during these times. And one of the things I would just say, leverage your position and power and network. We need to hire Black, and this is a Black strategy card, so any other group could put their name in there if they're finding that they need to do this too. But we need to execute an impactful economic strategy. We need to buy Black. We need to employ a comprehensive communication strategy. We need to use social media responsibly and wisely, consider fan base and all of these other outlets. We need to meet in small groups in churches and share knowledge. We should not keep knowledge and access to knowledge to ourselves. We need to know our rights, the US Constitution and its officials. We need to use our voice. We need to call. We need to lobby. We need to text. We need to do whatever we need to do to enact change. Though they were trying to take away Black History Month and all these other affinity months, we need to celebrate Black History Month 365, 24/7. And we need to invest in rest. We need to protect our peace. And we need to celebrate our progress, because we're going to make it all right. That's what my pastor at Solomon Temple has been preaching about. And shout out to Pastor Bryce. We're going to make it out all right.
All right. Well, thank you. On that note, we look forward to seeing you at Marcus Books, again, a historic Black institution in the Bay Area run by the iconic Blanche Richardson, a legacy institution for us, and we're going to have a great time on March the 30th. But thank you so much, Dr. Settles-Tidwell, for joining us and sharing your amazing wisdom. That was a great interview with Dr. Mia Settles-Tidwell, the author of Unscathed, a harm reduction strategy for women of color in the workplace. Dr. Settles-Tidwell's professional career is grounded in education. So let's move on to Legally Speaking, to talk about an issue in education that's at the top of the news right now, and that's the destruction of the United States Department of Education. We have the head of an agency appointed by you know who, whose assignment is to destroy the Department of Education. A major part of Project 2025 before the election that we all were aware of was to dismantle the Department of Education. And so, why does that matter, and what does it mean to you? Number one, dismantling the Department of Education and the process is to end a major source of federal funding for low-income schools under Title I. Also, it means to scale back the federal government's ability to enforce civil rights laws like Title IX, which prohibits sex-based discrimination, and Title VI, which prohibits race-based discrimination. It's requiring also, under this new administration, that the federal government litigate potential violations of the civil rights laws rather than trying to resolve issues through conciliation and mediation, working with institutions and school districts that may have problems. So, it also, another important feature is that it scraps the Biden administration's Title IX guidance which explicitly prohibited discrimination against transgender persons on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. That's why you're hearing about transgender. Let's talk about what is Title IX. 37 words. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Title IX was passed by Congress in 1972. The history of Title IX is captured in an amazing book called 37 Words by Sherry Boshert. I know a little something about Title IX because I had the honor of serving as the lead plaintiff in Alexander versus Yale, the first sexual harassment lawsuit under Title IX to establish that sexual harassment in education is illegal. My story as the lead plaintiff in Alexander versus Yale is featured in the book 37 Words. The battle that I and other women at Yale fought in the 1970s literally breathed life into Title IX. We used it in 1977 to fight sexual harassment on college campuses. Because of our fight, every school that receives federal funding, from colleges to high schools to junior high schools to elementary schools, was required to have a Title IX officer and, where appropriate, to establish a grievance procedure to address complaints about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sex discrimination in education. There was an extended battle around athletics to force colleges and universities to adhere to Title IX, and more importantly, to force the federal government, then known as the Office of Civil Rights, to fully enforce Title IX. So how did we get from protecting students on the basis of sex under Title IX to now weaponizing Title IX to exclude students from athletics based on sex? Only in the Trump world does that make sense. In the Trump world, the Department of Education is now investigating dozens of colleges around the country, as well as states themselves and departments of education for state agencies for alleged Title IX violations. With lightning speed, the Department of Education has found the state of Maine in violation of Title IX and threatened federal prosecution as well as litigation. In fact, though, Donald Trump is just Ronald Reagan all over again. In 1980, Ronald Reagan wanted to abolish the Department of Education. Reagan's staff even referred to Title IX as the Lesbians' Bill of Rights. It took 8 years after the Reagan administration decimated the Department of Education to restore the true meaning and benefits of Title IX for all women, along with the same rights for people who were the employees who were the beneficiaries of civil rights under Title VII. Throughout the 1980s, I litigated sexual harassment cases under Title IX, using Title IX in education, until the United States Supreme Court thrust a knife into the heart of Title IX. After a series of decisions by the Supreme Court, the main enforcement agency for Title IX became the Department of Education. That was the main tool, and that's why Project 2025 targeted the Department of Education. So what you need to know and understand is this: the transgender controversy is a made-up mask for their real intention, which is to destroy equity in education for all women. According to a New York Times study, there are less than 10 identified transgender athletes in college sports out of over 510,000 participants in college sports. Title IX, however, is at the heart of all progress for women in education, at the heart of all progress for women's athletics in this country. It's why you have a Women's National Basketball Association. Title IX is at the heart of all progress fighting sexual violence against women and genderized violence in college campuses, in high schools, in junior high schools. So when you hear abolish the Department of Education, make no mistake, they want to end all progress, really, for women in education. They want us to go back to the days when you could not get an education, and you couldn't get a job in education if you were a woman. They want to end all enforcement of Title IX for women. So that's really what this whole thing is all about. So there you have it. Ultimately, the battle for Title IX and gender equality in education will be fought and decided in the courts of law. Let's move on to correct the record. In a recent interview with Oakland Side, I was asked the question, do you have any hopes, worries, fears, or anything else about the current DA's administration? There are some things that I do hope for the residents of Alameda County. Number one, I hope that the DA's office will pursue a regional gun violence prevention strategy. Gun violence is the number one threat to public safety in Alameda County. And yet there is no regional task force, no regional conversation about it. We convened 2 gun violence roundtables to start the conversation. And in October of 2024, my team and I published a major report on tackling gun violence epidemic in Alameda County. It was a 6-month effort where we worked in collaboration with the Department of Public Health to track and publish data on gun violence in Alameda County from 2018 to 2023. We provided insights and strategies, and the Public Health Department made a commitment to continue that work on behalf of the residents of Alameda County. I hope that the DA's office will work in partnership with Alameda County Public Health Department to address the public health emergency of gun violence. Number 2, I hope that the DA's office will continue to focus on gender justice. I created the first gender justice division in the DA's office. Domestic violence cases represent the tip of the iceberg for violence in Alameda County. Too often, when I looked at cases of serious violence, I could see that the defendant had either witnessed domestic violence as a child, participated in it, or was a victim of it. And that led to a spiral and a cycle of deadly violence that impacted not only that person, but so many other people. As long as we don't address it with a holistic perspective, we will not get to the root of it. Gender justice units are happening around the country. Innovative programs in district attorneys' offices around the country are being formed and used to create strategies to address gender-based violence. Human trafficking in Alameda County is still a scourge upon our community. It is modern-day slavery. It is the fastest growing and the second largest criminal industry in the country. Alameda County remains the 3rd largest hub for sex trafficking in the country. And yet we are not dealing with it effectively. In Alameda County, human trafficking victims, 61% are African American, 15% are Latino, 12% are Caucasian, and according to the U.S. Department of Justice, more than 55% of the trafficking victims in Alameda County came out of the foster care system. The extreme violence that we see accompanying human trafficking occurs in areas where sex trafficking is happening on our streets. In July of 2023, the brutal murder of Nicole Marcy was a wake-up call and a call to action for the Alameda County DA's office. We formed the HEART team, which is an intra-agency collaboration of all the folks in our office that were working on gender-based violence, whether it was child sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, labor trafficking. We all came together and met on a weekly basis to develop strategies with which the office could begin to impact this modern-day slavery happening every day on our streets in our county, a threat to public safety. Finally, the prosecution of in-custody death cases must be robust. On April 18, 2020, a San Leandro police officer shot Stephen Taylor in a Walmart on a Saturday afternoon. We're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of that tragedy. That case was the first and only time my predecessor charged a police officer in a fatal shooting. When I arrived in the DA's office in January of 2023, the case was on the shelf and was not being actively pursued. We took it off the shelf, and we knew that it would be the first application of the new law under California law that bars the use of deadly force by a police officer unless it is necessary to prevent imminent death or serious bodily harm. Santa Rita County Jail has a long history, an unfortunate history of in-custody deaths. We are at the top of the state in our ratio, in the rate of in-custody deaths at Santa Rita County Jail. Santa Rita is the 5th largest county jail in the country. The deaths of Vanetta Martin and Maurice Monk represent the failure of policies and procedures in our jail. Once Santa Rita County Jail was described as the most dangerous place in Alameda County. Being arrested in Alameda County and sent to Santa Rita County Jail should not be a death sentence. Efforts to create jail oversight commissions and have jail oversight in this county have been stymied for years. There is an opportunity and a responsibility of the district attorney's office to hold the sheriff accountable for constitutional violations to protect the residents of Alameda County. So there you have it. I just want to correct the record.